Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Bad Left Hook Preview. I am one of your hosts, Connor Rebush of Bad Left Hook and BloodyElbow.com, and joining me today is Kyle McLaughlin. Kyle, thank you.
Hey Connor, thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. And today we've got some exciting boxing bouts to talk about in this coming weekend. That is the weekend of February 28th, day of Saturday, to be specific. We have Carl Frampton, who is the IBF, if I'm not mistaken, IBF junior featherweight champion of the world. He is facing, I go by the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board rankings. He is fighting the number five junior featherweight, or, oh my God, yes, super featherweight.
Super bantamweight, brother. Super bantamweight.
Like, I'm all over the place today. And then that card is really a one-fight card, but it's a really good fight. And then later on, we have Tyson Fury, heavyweight prospect, contender, I guess you have to call him, fighting European stylist Christian Hammer for 12 rounds. And then the co-main event of that card is absolutely worth talking about. Chris Eubank Jr. makes his comeback after that tough loss at the hands of Saunders, and he is fighting Dmitry Chudinov, who is not quite on Saunders' level, but is a pretty quality opponent to make a comeback against. He's not exactly a walkover. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And hey, as little as it means, he's holding a world trinket, so...
Yes. He's holding a reason for Chris Eubank to give some sanctioning body some money to hold that trinket himself.
Yeah. That's a good comeback fight. We'll talk about that in a bit for sure.
Yes, but first let's talk about Frampton versus Avalos. General thoughts on this fight?
I think it's a really good fight, and I think a lot of people might be sleeping on Avalos, and I think that's fair to do so. I actually think he's gonna give a good challenge for Frampton. If it's a walk in the park, then it means Frampton is even better than some assume him to be, including myself, and I really rate Carl Frampton. But Avalos is a sturdy contender, and I'll tell you what, he'd be a sturdy contender for Rigondeaux as well.
I absolutely agree with you. And the thing about this matchup is that it, on the surface, both of these guys look like similar fighters. On the surface, both these guys have about 70% knockout ratio. They're both very good at putting opponents away, and they've both done it very consistently. You know, they haven't been guys who racked up all their knockouts against tomato cans in the early part of their careers and then stopped fighting low-quality opposition and stopped getting finishes. They've continued to knock out good fighters as they've gone through their careers. And yet, there's a distinctly different way to how they get those knockouts. I would describe Avalos as more of a puncher, a born puncher. He's got heavy hands. When he hits you, it hurts, and he tends to knock people out on accident. Whereas I don't think anything Carl Frampton does is on accident. I think he's the most deliberate knockout artist in boxing today, where he sets up his knockouts very carefully and very methodically. And I don't think he has the heavy hands of Avalos, but I think he chooses, creates, and places his shots very, very well. Would you agree?
Definitely. Carl Frampton's the kind of guy that will give ground in order to lead you onto a shot. We saw that in the first Kiko Martinez fight. You saw that Martinez actually all over Carl Frampton. It looked like he was getting the better of him in terms of pressure. Frampton liked that because it gives him a chance. He sees openings, and he's the kind of guy who has the hand speed to catch them. He hasn't got the longest arms or the longest reach. He does rely on guys coming to him. He is good at sort of shoe shine flurrying guys at mid-range. He has got a decent jab. But I agree with you 100%. He's the kind of guy who's always thinking a step ahead. And there's no better indication of power, in my eyes at least, than carrying it to the later rounds. And Frampton does appear to hold the power to the later rounds, whereas Avalos is very much a guy who I would categorise him as an aggressive counterpuncher. He's the kind of guy who's going to take a shot to give a shot. He will pull back as he's being hit to take the edge of a shot, knowing that you'll overcommit yourself. Whereas Frampton will allow you to overcommit yourself and slip a shot. Avalos is the kind of guy who's going to half slip a shot, and I think that's going to give Carl Frampton more opportunities than vice versa.
Yeah, I think that Avalos likes to counterpunch, but he's definitely got more of the pressure fighter's mentality. He's happy to punch through whatever you throw at him, whereas Frampton really relies on being able to make you miss and then to hit you when you create the opening. When I think of Carl Frampton, I think of the knockdown that he hit Kiko Martinez with in their second bout as just kind of being his trademark maneuver, letting you miss the jab or the left hook and then leaping back in and firing the right hand over the top. He really likes when you expose one side of your head or the other and then catching you with the perfectly placed power punch that catches you off balance. Whereas Avalos is really just going to walk through what you throw at him and hit you back. He's kind of a bootleg version of Kiko Martinez, which I think is fair because he's one spot below Martinez on the rankings, but he's a little different than Martinez too because I think he packs more natural punch than Martinez. So you maybe have to worry about his forward pressure a little more. And Frampton is not exactly impossible to hit. He did eat some leather when he was against Martinez both times.
Definitely. I think Avalos is going to hit Carl Frampton, and this is why I'm quite excited about this fight, because I think a lot of people think that it's a walk in the park because I think Avalos is mandatory. I think they're thinking he's just a built-up guy. They see a couple of losses on his record and they assume that, oh, well, you know, he's a step above a journeyman but not really a genuine contender. And I think that's why people are going to be surprised by this fight. As I said earlier, as I alluded to earlier, if this isn't very competitive, it only reaffirms or rather establishes that Carl Frampton is better than even his biggest fans would say he is. Because in my opinion, at least, those that think it's going to be a whitewash are incorrect. And if it is a whitewash, then Carl Frampton is way better than I assume he is, because I think Chris Avalos is a good fighter.
I completely agree. And predictions for this fight, I'm feeling a late Carl Frampton stoppage. Avalos has never been stopped in his professional career, but Frampton has stopped a couple other guys who've never been stopped as well, and made it look relatively easy just by virtue of his accuracy and how consistent his setups are. So I'm going to say a late Frampton stoppage. What's your call?
I'm going to be a little bit more conservative. I think Avalos is going to come on strong in the early rounds. I think he might hurt Carl Frampton, who has shown to have a really good chin himself. I'm going to go with Carl Frampton via decision, probably 8-4, 1-1-6, 1-1-2 type decision. I think at some points it might be a bit of a staring contest as both guys wait for the other guy to leave an opening rather than trying to create an opening. But I think there's going to be a lot of fiery spots, and I think Carl Frampton will win a decision.
Fair enough. And with that, we move on to our next fight. This one, of course, is that one was on ITV1. You can probably find it online somewhere. Not advising any illegal activity, of course. Find a legal way to view this fight. But then over on Box Nation, we have Tyson Fury versus Christian Hammer taking place the same night. Tyson Fury, of course, he's got a big mouth and a big frame, and that's why people like to watch him fight. He's a very imposing physical specimen. He tends to outbox people rather than destroy them like the barbarian that his appearance might suggest. But he is a better boxer than advertised. I really think a lot of people, because of his antics, tend to underestimate how skilled he really is, and he's particularly fast for a man of his size, and he has really creditable skills. He's got a nice jab. He knows how to use his uppercuts to punish guys for trying to come in underneath his shots, and he's got a nice straight right hand too. And he is fighting Christian Hammer, who is a good fighter, but sort of on par with the level of opposition that Fury has been fighting for most of his career, which is to say, not exactly championship caliber opponent. Would you agree with that, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, Christian Hammer is a European level opponent. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. He's not one of the best. He's probably one of the best in Europe, but not going to challenge anyone anywhere near the top 15. As anybody who saw his fight with Marius Vuk would know, he's a kind of gritty fighter, but he's very basically skilled, and he's not great. He didn't look amazing against Kevin Johnson either, who is kind of the de facto journeyman for most prospects nowadays. He went from being a half-decent contender to being a kind of measuring stick for guys, and I don't really think that Hammer measured up so well. Going back to what you said earlier at the beginning of the video, Tyson Fury for me is one of the best contenders in the world. And that's not just because of the thin division, and it's not just because of the way he's been dispatching his opponents or beating them soundly. I think he has the physical tools. He has a decent enough resume. And I think he is one of the best heavyweights in the world right now. He is on a par with Wilder, in my opinion. He doesn't have that venomous dig. I think, as well as being a good boxer, he's a very good inside fighter when he isn't punching himself in the face. Reminiscent of Riddick Bowe in that sense. Certainly, I'm not putting him on the same level as Riddick Bowe. He doesn't have that kind of authority in his punches, but he is a multifaceted fighter. He can box.
Stylistically, Riddick Bowe is a great comparison. I don't think he has the pop of Bowe, but I do think he fights just like Riddick Bowe. He's a tall guy who knows how to use his height on the inside, which we see from surprisingly few tall fighters. Most of them take the Vladimir Klitschko, the Emmanuel Stewart approach, and they use their length, always trying to keep the opponent at range and tie up the moment they get inside. But as I said, Fury's got those nice upward shots. He's got nice short punches, which, tall guys are dangerous on the inside. Anybody who watches Muay Thai knows how deadly tall fighters are in the clinch. They've got, their knees are much closer to your face. And in boxing, we've got uppercuts for the same reason. You can pull a guy's head down. When he pops up, you can hit him as he leans back. If he comes in low on his own accord, you can hit him with uppercuts and punish him for his postural mistakes. So there are advantages to be had for the tall man on the inside, and Tyson Fury, I agree. I think he's one of the best in the world at using those advantages, and Riddick Bowe is the same way. Great uppercuts on the inside, really dangerous at close range, and not just because he would hit you and then tie you up as most tall fighters do.
Definitely, and Tyson Fury's a bit of a stylistic anomaly in the heavyweight division. He can hit to the body, he can switch hit, which is bizarre, and he does actually, it seemed quite gimmicky at first, but he does seem quite comfortable in both stances. He seems to have shored up the issues in his defence to an extent. He's still hittable. He's never going to be the Pernell Whitaker of the heavyweights, but who would, or rather the Muhammad Ali of the heavyweights, although he would like you to think he is. But I think Tyson Fury, the best thing going for him is not only is he a talented boxer who can fight at a number of different ranges, he's a natural fighter, and I think that people have been crying out for some excitement in the heavyweight division for a very long time, and now it's turned up. People say, well, Tyson Fury's just a big mouth. No, he's a natural fighter, and he's got the gift of the gab. I think he's a very exciting fighter in the division, and I expect him to clean up Hammer. Maybe not as Marius Vuk did with a clean KO, but I do think he'll break him down in 9, 10, or 11 rounds.
And credit to Fury. We've said a few times that his resume is not impressive, but it's not exactly easy to build up a resume of great opponents in the heavyweight division. It's a thin division, and so looking as good as he has against, realistically the best the division has to offer, aside from all the title contenders who are, of course, all lining up to fight Klitschko and not each other, it's difficult to find those fights. So I agree. I think Fury's resume is a little underrated. I think Fury himself is badly underrated. And as for Christian Hammer, we haven't talked about him much, but we said it before, kind of a bog standard European stylist. He's got a good jab. He's got nice footwork. He takes pivots and angles pretty well. He does a good job of maneuvering around the ring. And he's got decent pop in his punches. He's not at all a bad fighter, but he is, at least in terms of level, if not skill set, the level of fighter that Fury has proven himself eminently capable of beating.
Definitely. I mean, stylistically, obviously, he's very different from Derek Chisora, but I do think it's a good comparison because he is a level below Derek Chisora.
We could end up with a pretty interesting boxing match. We could end up with two guys trying to out-jab each other, with Hammer using his jab to try to get inside, but he's going to be more reliable than somebody like Chisora when it comes to that because he is a boxer-puncher. That is his style. And Tyson Fury is very much a boxer. So we may have a stylistic clash that the heavyweight division isn't actually used to seeing. It may be a better fight, maybe not in terms of action, but it's an interesting fight to me. The matchup could make for an interesting tactical fight.
The reason I think it's interesting as well is we're finally going to see whether Tyson Fury is always going to be switched on, because you'll find that when he perceives that his opponent is not that much of a danger, that's when you see him get knocked down. That's when you see him get involved in a war. So we're going to see, is he going to be as calculated as he was for the Chisora fight? Has he actually made that stride? Has he made that improvement? We've seen that he's improved his stamina. Is he going to be as dedicated to his craft for all of his fights? Because he's going to need to be. In the heavyweight division, it doesn't matter. Christian Hammer could knock Tyson Fury out. He weighs, 15 and a half, 16 stone. So if he hits Tyson Fury, he's going to knock him out. So I think it's an interesting fight, maybe not for the ebb and flow of the contest, but certainly in terms of seeing Fury's progression as a fighter.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of it'll be a measuring stick for how far Fury has come mentally. I think Fury's been a skilled boxer for a long time, but it's been his dedication, I think, to the craft that we've been waiting to see come full circle. And so,
definitely,
is he going to overlook Christian Hammer, or is he going to take him seriously, as he should, a dangerous, if not entirely impressive lower level, mid-level heavyweight, upper mid-level. Not to disparage Christian Hammer, good fighter, but he's the kind of guy who could hurt Tyson Fury, but if Fury comes with his A game, should not be able to come close to hurting him.
Agree 100%.
So predictions for the fight, obviously, I think we're both picking Tyson Fury. I think you mentioned earlier a late stoppage. I think I agree with that as well. Tyson Fury's not a guy who sets the world on fire with his power punches, but I do think he will probably catch Hammer sooner or later rather than sooner. I'm thinking maybe around the 10th round. We'll have worn him down with the jab, and it may just come down to the fact that Hammer doesn't want to be in there anymore because Tyson Fury's a pretty punishing guy to keep chasing around the ring all night.
Yeah, I can see a corner retirement or something when they realise that Hammer's just getting schooled. You'll find that Fury, once he does establish a jab, he'll come inside, and I think they'll see there's not really any need to keep him in there. So if he doesn't knock him down from just through accumulation, I think maybe his corner might pull him out. But it's an interesting enough fight.
Yeah, agreed. And so with that, we move on to our final fight for discussion today. We have Chris Eubank Jr. Fighting Dmitry Chudanov, and this may in fact be the most anticipated fight of the card. Tyson Fury, of course, is the headliner. He's the guy who's going to draw in the attention from the international audience, but Chris Eubank Jr. has a name certainly in the United Kingdom and somewhat around the world as well, a guy who everybody's had their eyes on for a long time, and I don't know, what did you think of his performance in his last fight? Did you think Eubank Jr. lived up to the hype, or did he show where he still needs to develop?
Well, I am a bit of a cynic, so I was not on the hype train in any way, shape or form, because as far as I was concerned, he'd been beaten. I'd never call a fighter a bum, but these guys were not challenging journeymen even. That's what I would say. I would say they were guys that turn up to get the rounds in rather than even make a challenge. So the jump up in class was huge, and I rate Billy Joe Saunders. I think he's a very talented
guy. Go from Omar Ciala and Ivan Jugic to Billy Joe Saunders. It is a massive leap in competition.
Well, yeah, in Britain we tend to call the journeymen which you see come over here, which do not turn up to fight but merely turn up to to be there. They tend to be Latvian road sweepers, you know what I mean? So we get a lot of Latvian journeymen coming over, and I don't ever remember Latvia being a hotbed of talent, you know what I mean? So Eubank had not really even faced any of the best domestic fighters. So the leap up to Billy Joe Saunders was one that I was expecting him to be horribly exposed in. I hate to use that word, but he's shown some brief flashes of class, but even most people would say, especially because we're quite cynical over here in Britain, we would have said that he was elevated to that level because of his surname, and because his dad's name still carries weight over it. So needless to say, I was very impressed. There were a lot of stylistic deficiencies that you saw in Eubank Jr. in the Billy Joe Saunders fight. Definitely, he's a slow starter. His punch output leaves something to be desired, but that was something that could be said of his dad during his prime. People forget that his dad was not tearing through everyone the way he did to Nigel Benn. So I think the way that Eubank Jr. performed in the later rounds, even though I had him losing the fight, I think that done more for his stock than beating up 25 more journeymen by one-sided decision or indeed by knockout. So I am now not on board the hype train at summer. Some people are saying that Eubank Jr. is going to be the next guy to beat Golovkin, he's going to be a two-weight world champion, blah, blah, blah. But I do think that going forward, he could be a major player in contendership in the middleweight division. Let's put it that way. I'm much higher on him than I was before.
Yes, it was the leap up in competition. People who really follow the sport were kind of expecting Saunders to outclass him, and from the beginning of that fight, it looked like he was going to. The way that Eubank Jr. kind of pulled himself up by his bootstraps, got his game together, and came back and came pretty close to stealing the momentum of the fight on the whole in those later rounds and winning the fight. It was really, really impressive to me, and I think to most people who were seriously following his career. So we're expecting big things from him now. Tell me, before we move on to talking about his opponent, Dmitry Chudanov, what's with the corner routine with Chris Eubank Sr.?
Very controversial over it. We don't like to see that kind of thing. His trainer's a respected guy, and Chris Eubank Sr. he's somewhat he's obviously highly respected for what he did, and he was part of some huge nights of boxing. He's seen as an eccentric guy by the nicer guys, and he's seen as a complete clown by the more cynical and sarcastic guys who think that he needs to stay the hell away from the corner. Either be your son's trainer or stay the fuck away from the corner, man. Simple fact.
You mean that the man wearing the sleeveless suit jacket is an eccentric man? Is that what you mean to tell me?
The man who drives a big rig truck around the streets of Brighton where he lives and had his lisp surgically removed only to gain a whistle when he speaks is an eccentric man. So yeah, I think the most worrying thing was not even his intervention. It was the fact that Chris Eubank Jr. openly scorned his trainer for giving him good instruction.
Yes.
And I think going forward, that's what's going to be his issue rather than any stylistic deficiencies, which are you are able to shore up your defence and you're able to learn how to have a higher output and improve the accuracy of your punches and your game plan. Those things you can work on. But arrogance to the degree that Eubank Jr. showed in that fight, that was not the kind of arrogance his dad ever showed.
Yeah,
that was a lack of respect for authority, and in boxing, that is one of the most important facets of the game.
Well, the thing is we should probably clarify just for those who don't know what we're talking about. The Eubank Junior and Senior have this habit of Senior will enter the ring and just stare at his son. He'll stand center ring and stare at his son on his stool, waiting for the next round to start. And it's really obviously kind of a show. He looks like he's trying, if you ask Eubank Sr. to explain any of this, he's going to give you some crazy mystical sounding phooey and try to explain it. Oh, I was testing him and he passed he's not doing anything. He's trying to create this impression that they have some kind of serious thing going on, that Eubank Jr. doesn't need a trainer. And Eubank Jr., of course, has bought into this idea as well. He sees his trainer, whose name I'm blanking on right now, unfortunately, because he is a good trainer, Ronnie Davies.
Indeed.
And he sees Davies as really a guy who just holds a spit bucket, which is a shame because if anybody's seen Eubank Sr.'s fights, Davies used to whip Eubank Sr. into shape mid-fight. I mean, he used to go full Emmanuel Stewart and slap Eubank in the face to get him to pay attention and sharpen up. And now he's training the man's son with the man he used to train standing right there, and both of them just defying his wisdom. And he is a good trainer. He's a guy who's trained, having trained Eubank Sr., he's obviously brought guys to the world level before. And now he's got this young kid basically telling him that he's too good and he knows how to box better than Davies could ever teach him, and it's really just kind of a disappointing thing to watch, and it's one of the things I'll be keeping my eye on in this next fight, because Chudinov is not Billy Joe Saunders, but he's a tough opponent, and he's put together a pretty impressive record, and he's got a kind of a spoiler style, and I just don't I don't want to see Chris Eubank Jr. falter because of his own arrogance. A fighter has to be arrogant to a degree. He has to know that he can beat anybody on earth, but at the same time, in the back of his mind, he has to know that his trainer can whip his ass if he wants to. The trainer has to be like his dad or his uncle at Christmas, where you'd never get into a fight with him because he's going to beat you. And if you don't feel that way about your trainer, you're not going to improve.
I agree, and I believe that when the reason Eubank Jr. started boxing is because he had a street fight with some guys at a parking lot in Brighton, I believe, where he lives, and Eubank Sr. said, well, if you want to fight, you have to box. I'm sending you to Vegas to see a good friend of mine called Mike McCallum. And I think if you want someone in the corner of Eubank Jr., it's Mike McCallum. Because first and foremost, Mike McCallum ain't going to take no shit from him. And secondly, Eubank Sr. isn't going to take any shit from Mike McCallum. And Ronnie Davies is he's not a Gentile old man by any means, but he is an older guy. And these two, they think they're it. And he's the kind of guy, I believe he did go back at them during the fight and said, look, if you don't want this, I'll go. Mike McCallum is not renowned as a trainer, but if you want to improve the kid and you want someone in the corner he's going to listen to, I think you could do not really much better than.
Well, I've got an inside line here because a friend of mine, sort of a boxing mentor of mine, was trained by Mike McCallum as well. And
there you go.
Yeah, the guy, he manages Johnny Toco's gym in Vegas, which is where Mike McCallum trains fighters these days. And I can say from secondhand experience, through this friend of mine that Mike McCallum, not exactly a great teacher of technique and things. I think he's, like a lot of fighters, doesn't necessarily understand what made him so great, but a good strategist, somebody who will have you make the adjustments in the big picture that'll keep you ahead. And like you said, he's a tough bastard. He's not going to let you talk down to him. He is absolutely going to take control of that corner to the point where he can even be a little cruel sometimes, I think, just making sure that you respect his authority. And that's something that Eubank Jr. probably, if he doesn't need it against Chudenov, that says a lot about his talent. But he will need it down the line if he wants to beat the Billy Joe Saunders of the world.
Well, he's already talking about he wants to fight Golovkin. So
exactly. And he's going to need that against Golovkin. He's never been in against somebody who's going to hurt him like that and who is not going to respect, the hype that he feels about himself. So he needs somebody to whip him into shape.
And I think Chudenov, he might not hurt Eubank Jr. He carries a respectable punch. He is a come-forward fighter. He's not quick. He's a rough fighter. He's not quick. He has an older brother, super middleweight Fedor, who is very quick and very powerful. Chudinov's more of an accumulative guy. He's a workhorse. He's not the most skilled or talented guy. He attempts to slip punches, and there is some thought behind his work. But Eubank Jr., they picked this fight for a reason, and that's because Eubank Jr. has a massive, I would say, size advantage, but most importantly, he has a speed advantage, and there's a world trinket on the line. And to the casual observer who will be wanting to see Chris Eubank Jr. and will know who his dad was, they're going to think that he's a quote-unquote world champion after this fight. That's why I picked this fight, and I do expect Eubank Jr. to win. But as you said, if there are issues, and there are issues, Chudenov will maybe not expose Eubank Jr., but he is going to bring them to the forefront even more. Unlike Billy Joe Saunders, who's renowned for having a terrible gas tank. He was a great amateur, and he seems to have carried a 3-round mentality into his fights. It's only Hart that gets him through the later rounds in all of his 12-round fights. Chudenov seems to be a guy who can plug along at the same pace for 10, 12 rounds. So
he's kind of like a smaller Antonio Margarito. He's got that kind of style where he's going to be rough and tumble. He's going to come forward. He's going to hit you with combinations. No one single punch is going to put you away, but he will continue to land them. And he's not exactly the most hittable guy in the world. And I don't mean to ever imply in any of this conversation that Chudenov is going to be a sincere test for Eubank Jr., that he's got a chance to beat him. But he's not Omar Siala. He's not Ivan Jukic. Eubank Jr. has, in accepting this fight, basically accepted his decision as a top fighter. He has, after having had a close loss to Billy Joe Saunders, agreed to continue fighting at a level above the journeyman level that he was at before. And Chudenov is a credible opponent to fight after that loss. And so it'll be an opportunity, even if Chudenov doesn't really have a clear avenue to victory, it'll be an opportunity for fans and analysts who have an interest in Eubank Jr.'s career to really see if anything has changed. Because if it hasn't changed in this fight, it becomes increasingly unlikely that it ever will.
I agree with you 100%. And for me personally, even though Frampton Avalos is probably has the highest stakes out of all the fights, and it's certainly got the highest level of fighters, depending on what you think of Tyson Fury, certainly the mutual level in that fight is much lower than Frampton Avalos. I actually think this Eubank Jr. and Chudenov fight is the most interesting fight of the weekend, which a lot of people would disagree with, because Frampton Avalos is two top 5 fighters. But for me, I'm really interested because we're going to see if Chudenov can shut up the prospect and show he's a true contender rather than a fringe world-class fighter. And B, we're going to see if Eubank Jr. has learned anything and whether he can go on to become a fringe world-level fighter. Because I think with a win over Chudenov and maybe with a former titleist like a Daniel Gill or something like that, or the rematch with Billy Joe Saunders, he is well in frame to move into that sort of top cluster of fighters that are hoping to get a fight with a Miguel Cotto or a Gennady Golovkin. And Eubank Jr. has got the goods. I hold my hands up. I was wrong about him. He is a talented fighter.
Tons of potential. We'll see if he can fully realize it in this fight. It'll be good. It'll be a good measuring stick for him. We're both picking Eubank Jr. to win, of course. Stoppage, decision. What's your call?
I'm going to go with a decision. I think Chudenov's a pretty tough guy. Yeah. He has been less than stellar against some of the tougher guys he's fought. He's had to grind out a win. And I think on home turf with a flashy, eye-catching style and obviously a pronounced advantage in hand speed, I think Eubank Jr. should pull out the win.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Chudinov's tough. He's never been stopped before as a professional, and he has taken some shots. He's not impossible to hit, but he's also very, very difficult to put away. So I think a Eubank Jr. decision is a pretty reasonable call. Any final thoughts on the card this weekend before we sign off?
Joe, it's a good weekend of fights. It's a good weekend of fights for Britain, but it has potential to have ramifications in the world sport of boxing. You know what I mean? They're all good contenders that are fighting. You've got two top 20 guys, and you've got
the resurgence of maybe kind of the resurgence of Great Britain as a world power in the sweet science.
Well, yeah, but the big thing is that Carl Frampton and Chris Avalos is on national TV, just as Al Heyman has moved guys over to NBC, which is obviously big news. In the States, we've got, it might be a one-off, it might not be, but we've got Frampton versus Avalos on ITV, which is the joint biggest network in the UK. So it's great for boxing fans. It's great for people that, the casual fans that might want to learn a bit more about what we've got out there. And
great for
I think
boxing.
it's great. Great for boxing in general, man. That's all we want as fans and connoisseurs, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thanks for joining us, everybody. This has been the Bad Left Hook preview. I'm Connor Rebush. You can find me on Twitter at BoxingBush. Kyle, what's your Twitter handle?
At Ferocious Flea.
And, of course, you can find both of our works, analysis, history, all kinds of fun stuff, on badlefthook.com. And you can also stop by Bad Left Hook this Saturday if you're looking for a place to discuss the fights. We always have fun play-by-play, good community to talk about whatever big events are happening. And there should be some fun things to talk about with the fights we have lined up this weekend. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.